it's me, Rohini. Call me Ro. I'm back again with some more quirky tales. And today we're going to talk about something very, very specific that obviously not a lot of people are going to be able to relate to. But it is a story that I really wanted to tell. And it is about my daughter, Yalaina. So in 2006, I had a lot going on. In 2005, October of 2005, I was beaten up and raped during a home invasion. That, yes, will be a story for another time. I got married in August of 2006 to the most recent ex. And it was primarily because I was vulnerable and afraid. I did not want to be alone. I did not want my house to be invaded again. That most recent ex was kind of muscular, and I felt like that would not have happened again with him in the house. So it was ultimately a marriage of vulnerability, kind of desperation. He was not great to me. I was not great as a human while I was with him. It was during that marriage where I kind of started to feel like a shell of a woman, and I had lost kind of my identity a bit because of how much had happened. I did not have time to recover from the rape before I was married, and a month after our wedding was the rape trial, because the trial had kept getting continued from October all the way, because the guy got caught 3 weeks later, so he got caught in October of 2005, but we didn't have the trial until September of 2006. And then shortly after that, I found out I was pregnant. So I went from trying to heal from this rape situation, jumping into this marriage, and now I'm pregnant, all within a year. And I already had 2 kids from a prior bad relationship. And so I'm trying to keep my kids safe and together and protected, and I don't want them to know too much of what's happened, because I don't want them to be afraid, and I don't want them to fear for me. And it was just so much. It was so much happening. So I find out that I'm pregnant towards the end of 2006. When I'm around 4 to 5 months along, usually it's the time when they tell you what the sex of the baby is if you want to know. So we go in for that appointment, and they do tell us that it's a girl, but then they tell us to hold on. I hold. I knew something was wrong. My husband, he didn't care. He was busy texting everybody that it was a girl. But the technician very firmly said, hold on, with like no joy in her voice. And then she was like, a doctor is going to come talk to you. So my doctor finally comes in. She tells us that she has noticed some swelling around the baby's neck and abdomen, and then that can be a very serious situation. We get rushed out from the clinic straight to a maternal fetal specialist, where I have to have an amniocentesis done, which was really painful. That's where they take a very long needle, no exaggeration, a very long needle, and they insert it right through the pregnant belly to get into the amniotic sac so that they can get a sample of the fluid. And it was very painful. It was very painful for me. But we're going to fast forward this along. By the time I left the maternal fetal specialist, they wanted me on bed rest. It was much more complicated than they had initially anticipated. So I went straight home. I had to call my job and say I won't be back. I'm at home on bed rest. By the time I was around 27 or so weeks along, I had to get rushed to the hospital, and I ultimately had to stay there. There was some complications with the baby, with my lungs, with the baby's fluid. There wasn't enough fluid. My heartbeat became irregular. There was just a lot happening. And this was in addition to the stuff that was already happening in the pregnancy, because it was already a particularly difficult pregnancy. Because what I didn't mention is, during the very, very first ultrasound, they had seen 2 sacs, similar to my boobies here. And the one sac had a baby in it. The one sac just had kind of a growth in it. So Yalaina was actually supposed to be twins. And during this time, we only found that out because my symptoms in the pregnancy were so brutal. I had around-the-clock sickness. I had backaches. I ended up with a separated pubic symphysis, which is when the cartilage that holds your 2 pubic plates together separates. And that's extremely painful. That hurt to sit down, stand up, roll over in bed, everything. In fact, by the time they had me on hospital bed rest, they had to install a trapeze over the bed so that I could pull myself up, because none of the muscles down there worked anymore without an incredible amount of pain. And it was a really, really hard pregnancy. I had headaches, nosebleeds, brushing my teeth made me vomit, taking showers made me vomit. I had reactions to almost every bit of food, and it was just a really hard pregnancy. There were a few times where migraines almost took me out completely, and it was just difficult. So by the time I was on hospital bed rest, it was intense. Not only was I dealing with all of the pregnancy symptoms, but now I was having to be strapped to the bed because I'm on strict hospital bed rest, which means I have to ask permission to even roll over in the bed, and nurses have to come in and readjust everything and help me roll over, because I was on constant 24/7 monitoring of the baby and myself, because they were starting to notice fluid in my lungs because of some fluid situations that were happening with the amniotic sac and the baby's lungs and the placenta. It was just a lot. I ended up being on hospital bed rest for 33 days, which is a really, really long time. And I often say that it was worse than prison. And I still look back, and again, this was 2007, I still look back, and I'm like, no, that was worse than prison. I would have preferred prison, because at least in prison you can stand up when you feel like it, sit down when you feel like it. You get meals that you're allowed to eat, whether you want to eat them or not. And that was not always the case on hospital bed rest. I had to ask permission to sit up in the bed, lie down in the bed, turn over. I could only shower a certain number of times a week because it was a whole fiasco. And it was just a lot. It was overwhelming. And I was still reeling from having been beaten up and raped a year and a half prior. There was a lot going on internally. So by the end of the 33 days, in Yalaina's 33rd week of gestation, she ended up having to be delivered emergency C-section style. And my husband at the time, in all of his compassionate, loving glory, wouldn't even leave work. He was like, I'll be there when I get there. And so the doctors and the surgeons were like, okay, we're going to wait for him as long as we can, but we really need to get this baby out of there. He finally gets there, we waited, and the C-section itself was rough. Yalaina's body part of her body got stuck under my rib cage and intertwined with other organs. So once they got into the sac where she was dwelling, she was alive and kicking, quite literally. So much so where one of the nurses had to put their knee in my thigh to pull Yalaina out from under my ribs, because wiggling her, the doctor was trying to wiggle her out and she was just stuck. And so they had to grab her by her little feet and pull her out of me. They had to unlodge her, and then they had to put all my organs back. At one point I saw my small intestine, and I was like, what was that? And the doctor, she was just like, yeah, that was part of your small intestine. So they put me back together. They didn't know if the baby was going to survive because they had been telling me the entire pregnancy, she is not going to survive the delivery. She's not going to survive the delivery. She's not going to survive the delivery. I can't tell you all how many times I heard that my little girl was not going to survive the delivery. Every doctor who came to see me during the 33 days that I was on bed rest made it their business to let me know, she's going to die. She might not live longer than 5 minutes. In fact, when they first diagnosed her when I was 5 months along, during that doctor's visit that I spoke about, they were trying to convince me by the time I got to the specialist that I should have a medical abortion, and I just refused. I was like, is there a 1% chance? And they were like, yeah, there's about an 8% chance. And I was like, good enough for me. I was committed. We were going to have this baby. And so she was born. They yoinked her right out of my ribs. And she coughed. And I said, what was that? In my anesthetic-induced stupor, I was like, that sounded like a baby's sound. What was that? Was that her? Did she make a noise? Did she live? And she lived. Once they got her over to the incubator, blue gowns from who knows where just kind of swarmed the OR, the operating room, and they were doing CPR and draining fluid from her abdomen and draining fluid from her neck and trying to get her on a ventilator to get her to breathe. And she had petechiae spots all over her belly, and I couldn't see her or touch her. Petechiae are like little broken blood vessels, basically. That's the short explanation. And it was just, I didn't get to see her for the first few days. My husband got to see her and was like, she's breathing. He was super excited. But I was not yet excited because I had yet to lay eyes on her. And so the nurses were taking pictures of her and bringing the pictures to me because that's the best they could do. I was recovering from surgery. And she was in the NICU immediately, the neonatal intensive care unit. And we couldn't see each other. So after a few days went by, I was finally able to get into a wheelchair, and they wheeled me down to her, and she was the most beautiful specimen I had ever laid eyes on. Like all of my children were when they were born, but she was particularly special because she lived. I didn't think I was going to get to lay eyes on her alive. I thought that the very first time I was going to get to meet my daughter, she was already going to be cold and stiffening, quite honestly. But that wasn't the case. She was lying there in her little NICU bed and connected to all of the machines that the hospital had to offer to keep that little body alive. And she fought. And we had her for 46 days. When she was 11 days old, I was able to hold her for the first time. It was a great big production to get her into my arms. But when it happened, it was everything. And she opened her eyes one time for me, and that was everything. I was able to hold her 4 times in her 46 days. She opened her eyes up for me twice. She cried for me once. And I started making little socks for her and buying little socks for her, and friends of ours would make and buy socks for her because she couldn't wear clothes because she was connected with all kinds of tubes and wires and patches and masks and everything. All of her connections stretched off of both sides of her little incubator crib. And like you had to stand way back to take a landscape picture of all of her connections. And she fought, and she fought, and she fought, so much so that Indiana University's medical center came in to observe her because the condition that she ended up being diagnosed with was called hydrops fetalis, and it's essentially an accumulation of fluid in the abdomen and they can't really identify where the fluid is coming from, but the fluid just keeps producing, and it ends up putting pressure on the organs, and that's ultimately what the cause of death was. And that's partly why she got stuck up in me, is because her abdomen was so big, and she was breached, and she had curled up so far in her little fetal position that it was all really just difficult for everyone involved. Me, her, the doctors, the surgeons, the techs, everyone. And with an hydrops fetalis, if the medical team can't figure out where the fluid is coming from, typically the baby won't last more than 2 or 3 days outside of the mom. Well, this baby said, nope, I know you guys haven't found where the fluid is coming from, but it doesn't matter, I'm here. And she was here for 6.5 weeks. And the morning that she passed away, it was like the creator knew that I didn't need to be involved in that at all. AT&T was supposed to be coming out to my house to work on the landline. And up until that point, they had never been on time. They were supposed to come out at 8 in the morning, and I really wanted them to come out at 8 in the morning so that I could get to the hospital by 10, because I had been at the hospital every single day that she was there. I would only leave if there was an appointment like that, or if I needed to shower or get my hair done or something little like that. And so I'd be gone for a few hours and right back in the hospital. And this particular morning, AT&T was Johnny on the spot. They got there right at 8 o'clock. And the technician was taking their time. And then around 8:45, 9 o'clock, I get a call from the hospital that Yalaina is not doing well, and this is the worst that she's looked the entire time that she's been alive. So I asked the AT&T tech, I'm like, listen, are you almost done? Because I got to get out of here. My baby girl is in the hospital. I've really got to go. And he says, you have a baby in the hospital? A guy I go to church with, his niece is in the hospital right now. What hospital is your daughter in? And I said, she's a Methodist, but can we wrap this up because I really got to go? And he was like, wow. You know, my guy Anthony, his niece was just born and she's struggling. She's in the NICU in the NICU at Methodist. Come to find out, the AT&T technician went to church with my brother, and they had been praying for my little girl at that church. Like, it was incredible. And there was so much support for her, and she just defied all the odds. The AT&T tech guy, he got done 10 minutes after I got the call from the hospital that they tried to give her CPR. They tried to give her a shot of epinephrine, but she had passed. And I was like, well, I really do need to go, but I guess you can take your time now. There's no rush. And then the technician started to cry, and I started to cry, and so he hugged me, and he was like, I'm done. I'm getting out of here. You go do everything that you need to do. So I dropped my kids off with a parent of one of their friends and picked up my husband's mom. We went to the hospital, and I got to hold my baby girl unattached for the first time and the last time. She was not connected to any wires or monitors or tubes. She just kind of had a peaceful look on her little swollen face. And it was an equally beautiful and heartbreaking moment. And I laughed and cried like a crazy person. And my then husband got there and gave her a bath, and I had picked out an outfit that I took with me to the hospital, and he gave her a bath and put her little Minnie Mouse outfit on, and we had to leave her there. She never got to come home. The next steps were none of the fun stuff. Funeral arrangements, picking out caskets, and it was just all a really surreal moment, time of life, but it happened, and I lived through it, and I learned so much about myself and my family and what support looks like. I learned about emotions, and I saw the birthing process in a whole new way, even though I had already had 2 children up until that point. It was such a life-changing experience from beginning to end that I can't even really justify it with words right now, or fully describe it with words right now. But Yalaina was one of the best things that has ever happened in our experience. And the team who came in from Indiana University's medical center, who did all that observing of my little girl, they ended up creating a course, a study, several professional journals, and she was included in the newest edition of one of their textbooks in the neonatal medical program for Indiana University. She affected so much change in the 6.5 weeks that she was here. And she taught the doctors things, she taught the specialists things, she taught the x-ray techs things, the pharmacy techs things. Like, I had so many conversations with so many staff and medical professionals during the course of the whole ordeal, from my being on bed rest until her funeral and homegoing celebration, that there were countless lives that she touched. So much so that the day of her homegoing celebration, I didn't want anybody dressed in black because it just seemed crazy. I was personally dressed in bright hot pink. And I was very composed, and I found myself comforting a lot of people who were there, people who were showing up in tears and just in shambles and trying to comfort me, but I was just in a different place that particular day. Until a giant horde of people came through the door of the funeral home, and it was nurses, doctors, x-ray techs, pharmacy techs. Like, that was the one part of that day that almost did me in. I was so moved and so touched that they all showed up on their own time. They took their own PTO, their own vacation days, their own flex time to show up to send off my little girl. And it was incredible. The unity that she created, the education that she created, the resilience that she created. It was all phenomenal, heart-wrenching, devastating, magical, surreal, beautiful. Like, pick an adjective and it applied. And so that's all. I really just wanted to share that because I know that a lot of people struggle with a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. One of which is some of the struggles of parenting and childbirth and health issues and things that just don't get spoken about enough, and often end up with us feeling like we are alone going through this thing all by ourselves. I know I felt like that. I couldn't even talk to my husband. I talked to my journal, several of them, and that was where I found my solace. And I just don't want anyone to ever feel as though they are alone going through this thing. The NICU community brought me a lot of comfort. I ended up finding online message boards of parents who were going through similar things and had gone through some similar things. And I just want to be another voice to the masses saying, hey, no, you are not alone. You're not alone. The days and nights where I sat in the NICU when the lights were turned off and the babies were sleeping and I was in a rocking chair, just me and my breast pump, trying to get some extra nourishment so that they can put it in my baby girl's feeding tube, and just thinking, there's no one that I can talk about this with. I'm so utterly alone. There aren't even other parents in this room with me right now. And it wasn't the case. I wasn't alone. And, other parents who were actually around, who I just were not in my eyesight at the moment, let me know that I wasn't alone. They reminded me that we are now another kind of family, and that there are other things that are at stake, and other things for us to learn, and other ways for us to support each other. And now I just want to pay that forward. Throughout the years since this happened, I've wanted to pay it forward, and I have in lots of different ways. There's 2 chapters in my book right around this experience that even include, actual journal entries of mine from the time. But I want people to be comforted. Even just dealing with difficult pregnancies is hard, because you run into these other moms that are like, pregnancy's so beautiful and magical and wonderful, and I'm like, I was throwing up in the shower, and as soon as I got out of the shower, I was throwing up in the sink because I tried to brush my teeth. And then because I was throwing up, I had a migraine for the next 7 hours. And you just feel very alone. But the thing is, it's all an illusion. Whatever it is that you're going through, you don't have to feel alone. There's so many of us who have been through so many horrific, horrendous things, who understand human behavior on a different level, compassion on a different level, suffering and depression and anxiety and psychosis on different levels. I am here to say I am here for you. The comments are open, my DMs are open, but whatever it is that you're going through, you do not have to feel alone. And my little Yalaina Symone, she spent 46 days on this earth trying to teach us that exact lesson, and she did so successfully, if I can say so myself. So that's it for today. That's that story. I hope you got something out of this, like I said, even if it was just you being able to pass the time. So I will talk to you soon, and we'll see what I talk about next.